All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this year's virtual panel on survivorship and identity. My name is Emily Hodge, and I am the Outreach and Programming Intern for We Are Her. And I'm also an undergraduate student at the University of Montana, and I'm studying social work. This year's topic centers on identity as a survivor, which is a theme I think resonates with anyone who has experienced trauma in their lifetime. This is an issue that seems really relevant right now. We've heard a lot about it in our other events. Trauma can affect us by disrupting our sense of identity and how we relate to ourselves. So I'm excited to have our panelists here today, and they're going to lend us a little wisdom surrounding this topic. With that, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, just say your name and a little bit about you. And let's start with Cheyenne.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cheyenne Tyler Jacobs. I'm based here in Atlanta, Georgia, originally from Jersey. I'm the founder of She Will Speak. So I do a lot of my activism work and a lot of community work with also grouping that in with my media and spoken word. That's actually how a lot of people know me. So I'm very happy and honored to be here. I am actually a board member as well as We Are Her, and I serve as a board member for a couple of other organizations that's really centered within the sexual violence prevention movement. So very happy to be here and to also hear a lot of wise words from our other panelists.
James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is James Landrith. I am a survivor of sexual assault. I have been involved in volunteer work and paid work, as well as both an advocate and a subject matter expert for both civilian and military circles. I currently work in SAPR in a military environment, and really glad to be here and part of this team.
Thanks. We're glad to have you here. And Dr. Christine King.
Hi there. So I've been working as a therapist for about 22 years, and I was in law enforcement before that. I've mostly been working with military and first responders, as well as people who've survived personal trauma. And I just love my work. I feel like it was a wonderful healing extension from law enforcement, because you actually get to see people heal and see how things turn out for them. So I'm just so happy to be here, and I hope I can contribute something that will be useful to others.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. We will go ahead and dive into our first question. Why is identity such an important concept for survivors, especially?
So I actually would say that I feel, especially for survivors, identity is important because you kind of end up in this limbo of, well, who am I after this, incident, right? After this traumatic experience. And I think in a world that's very much structured on your identity, like everything from like your zodiac sign, are you pumpkin spice or apple? Apple is the only one that matters, but that's not the question. You know, what is your profession? Where do you go to school? Like we form so many communities out of where we align in our identities. I'm Black, and it's like that's a community in itself, right? Like Black Twitter is a thing, like it's a movement in itself. So the idea that something such as assault would not kind of now put you in a group, it's like, well, who am I now? Even for myself being a survivor, the first thing that came to my head is like, okay, now I'm like with this group of people, and it's like, what exactly happens? And I think you now have to restructure your life. So what does dating look like? Now that I've experienced this traumatic event, what does it look like if I want to have a certain career path? All of us, even on this panel right now, and definitely a lot of folks in the movement, whether we ourselves are survivors or we know someone who is, or maybe we just looked at the world and said, wow, somebody needs to fill up the space, there is a reason why we're involved with that. So even me being here giving my time, that is a part of the fact that this is now part of my identity. So I think understanding that as survivors, you're almost trying to figure out, how does this identity now look in my day-to-day life? Because unfortunately, we don't live in a world that kind of just lets you pause, and lets you kind of be like, I went through something, I need this time to heal, I need to figure out who I am with all of this happening. It's kind of just all happening in tandem. So I think, to me, and what I've noticed with working with survivors, I think that's one of the biggest reasons that it's just so important, because it's like, who am I after this happening to me?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It can just be one thing after the other and trying to figure out life as it's happening to us. And it's all happening at once. So I appreciate that answer. Thank you.
I really feel like it's important to emphasize that, we're not defined by what has been willed upon us, by what has happened to us, or even by our own mistakes. We're so much more than that. I really believe that our true self is that sense of identity that we're actually born with. And, we all studied a lot about nature and nurture. And the more I've gone along in my own graduate work, the more I think that experts really believe that, our true self has always been there. We spend most of our life identifying who we are and trying to find that true self. I think the way that I like to sort through, the work of the mind is that the true self is the one that's listening to all of the information that, it receives through our environment and our experiences, and tries to discern, who we are. So trauma can be so overwhelming and derailing to that process. And understanding that mind-body impact of trauma and practicing the healing and coping strategies that can help redirect the person back to their center is a lot of what I think the clinical work is that I do. It takes a lot of time and space away from the sources of trauma, and ideally a support system and a higher power for this to happen.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I like how you brought up a support system as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that later too. So the next question is, many survivors report feeling like a completely different person after significant trauma. So what advice would you give to someone who is grieving the loss of their former self and they just don't feel the same anymore?
Well, I would definitely remind people that a traumatic experience is something that happened to them. It is not who they are. It does become part of what makes up that person's experiences, which impacts their identity overall. Just like everything you go through in life has an impact on how you feel and how you look at things and what you believe. All that wraps up into your identity. It's up to a person to decide how much of what that experience is they want to use going forward as part of the identity they're presenting to the world and exactly how they view themselves. And sometimes counseling might help with processing that, but it's going to take some time, and I would say don't rush it. It is a journey. It is not a quick drive to the supermarket as far as figuring this stuff out. It's complicated. It changes over time. How you feel about your own identity has changed for non-traumatic events over time. Graduating college, you feel different after that. Getting your first really big job, you feel different about that. Having your first child, you feel like a different person after that. It's naturally that after a traumatic event, you're going to feel different. All of those things make up your identity. And the traumatic event is one part of that. You can't excise it and push it to the side, but it does become part of the rest of what made you whole.
That was a wonderful answer. I really agree with everything you said. And I'd like to add that I think it's so important to feel our feelings and really allow ourselves to grieve, because trauma seems to steal our innocence. And consequently, the way that we perceive the world can be so much different afterwards. We're no longer as safe as we felt we once were. Suddenly we become hypervigilant and anxious and suspicious. We may become emotionally numb and avoidant. We cannot relax and achieve restful sleep sometimes. It becomes hard to focus. We trust no one not to have their own agendas, it seems like. And our emotions easily flood when we encounter triggering reminders of the trauma. And it takes a while for our physiology to settle down again. We may try medications, but they have side effects. Those can contribute to that sense of feeling differently than we did before the trauma. We may self-medicate, which causes its own problems. Trauma-informed therapy can help, and mind-body interventions such as art, music, gardening, resuming a hobby or a sport, yoga, martial arts. The people I believe that seem to recover the best definitely have a spiritual pursuit, a sense of a higher power. I think that really, helps the world seem not so random. Connecting with nature and animals provides grounding in many ways. Trauma recovery is really just this journey. Like James says, it's not a quick drive. It's something that's windy and slow, and sometimes you go fast and slow, and sometimes you have to stop for a while. I think, in terms of one intervention I know of that seems to help right away is EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's one of the top 3 or 4 trauma interventions recommended by the World Health Organization. And usually within a few sessions, the mind can reprocess some of those events and begin to restore where you were before. And there's a wonderful website. It's called emdria.org. So EMDR International Association. And there's a lot of articles about the evidence-based treatment that EMDR provides. And I would really encourage survivors to look into that. It might kind of jumpstart them on their way to that journey.
That connection to a higher power or spirituality can really be anything. It's just however you connect to the world around you, or the spark of the divine, and it doesn't have to be, you don't even have to believe in God or anything like that. You can just connect with nature, sit out and sit with, the beauty that is yourself as well. So it can really be unique to any person. And I agree, that can be really special. How can survivors begin to rebuild their identity after trauma?
Really understanding where your trauma is sitting. And what I mean by that is, one thing I utilized when I was a counselor for youth back in Jersey, and I've used even my own personal in therapy, is like a wellness wheel. And it, cut up into different sections, and it shows different assets of your mental well-being, your social life, your spiritual life, your financial life. And I think sometimes what we forget is, although we are one being, like there's many different aspects that make up who we are. And your trauma, or the way that you are maybe expelling like your frustration or your anger or your sadness, could be sitting maybe in one block versus another. And the thing is, it's like that's why I love it's a wellness wheel, because it's like any other wheel, like your car. Like, even though it might be popped on the left, your tire is going to go flat, right? So maybe you, after this trauma, it's like you're not hanging out with your friends. Well, what does it look like to rebuild those social connections again? If you used to be very creative and now you're not doing your art anymore, if you literally are just, so depressed at this point in your life that you can't even get out of bed. Okay, so what are we working towards? Or is there any form of professional help and counseling that you can utilize? So I think also, taking a moment to really see, like, on this map, like where do I need help in? And understanding that help is also okay. And I think too, that it's both intentional and unintentional, right? There are definitely days when you get up and you're like, okay, I need to work on me. I know for myself, even to this day, Sundays are like my alone days. Like, I really sit with myself, I journal, I try to reconnect with, my inner being, my spiritual self, and really reset myself for the next week. So that's kind of that intentional work of like, okay, this bothered us, let's dig a little deeper. But I think there's also that unintentional where it's like something just made you laugh, or something made you cry, and really saying like, wow, why did that hit me? Or like, why did that make me feel some type of joy? And I like to use the analogy that my therapist kind of gave me. She's like, healing is honestly like moving into a house. Like, you might have packed everything up and be unpacking the kitchen, but you're going to have something from the bathroom possibly in there that just got thrown in there, right? So as you're healing and you're unpacking, you might come across some things that you maybe didn't plan to really heal, or things to really restore. And it's okay to put those to the side and be like, I'm not ready to address you yet. Like that, like this is not the time for that. So I think those, different things can really help with, rebuilding the identity. And kind of, I think what both James and Dr. King said as well, like, your identity is very fluid. Your identity is forever changing. So even the aspect of rebuilding it, that definition can change for yourself every day. And I think understanding that when at least I'm telling you to rebuild it, it's how do you feel safe being yourself? What has to happen for you to walk outside and be like, what happened to me was not my fault. I am deserving of kindness and love and respect. And whatever that is, whatever that deep feeling needs to happen, that to me is rebuilding that identity. Because, you know, every day I think I've woken up, I pick up something different. I am someone different, right? And that's the beauty of it. But I think when we talk about survivors, we really just want to make sure that you are feeling safe with whatever identity you're choosing to rebuild, recreate, or just fluidly flow through.
One thing that I talked about is, you know, maybe deciding what is important to you, thinking about how the different things that make up the biggest part of your identity mix and who you are to different people, and taking a look at that and figuring out, you know, what you have energy for, what you don't, and not trying to be somebody you were previously, because that person is gone. It doesn't matter what kind of event it was. You're a new person every time you experience something new, even if it is a minor change. In this case, a traumatic experience is a big change. And you just got to be gentle with yourself and not try to push too hard, while recognizing that you're going to be different in ways, in some ways that will surprise you. And you may find reservoirs of strength you didn't know you had. And then things that might have been problematic to you previously that bothered you more, you may not care about that as much. Maybe something where you figure, you know, this is not the big crisis I thought it was. I've been through something so much worse, so much more difficult and traumatic, that the rest of my life is actually a lot simpler to me now. That's part of a realization sometimes that some people can go through while they're coming to grips with, you know, how to move forward in meshing this new part of their identity.
Thank you. I do think it's really important to not put a timeline on that. And like you said, don't push yourself too hard. Don't worry about meeting a deadline on all of this stuff. Some survivors have shared that it can be difficult to identify as a survivor at all. What's your advice to those who might feel like their trauma is not valid or that their experiences do not count?
You really can't compare yourself to somebody else. It's not helpful long term. In the short term, it can feel like a way of like shutting down the trauma and feeling like, you know, I'm good to go. This was not that big a deal compared to what my friend experienced. That's going to delay healing. And it can be a form of self-victimization and self-blame when you focus on feeling like your trauma is not valid or that your experiences do not count. And there is a lot of mixed messages in the media and on social media that help reinforce that, unfortunately, especially when the primary way that people see sexual assault is a stranger in the shadows, like you see in a movie. When, as most people know, the overwhelming vast majority of assaults are created by somebody you know. Focus on what you need, not what you think your experience looks like compared to others, because that person and you are not an apples to apples comparison. You're just not. You're both different people. Everything that's happened to both of you, everything you've experienced and done up to that point in life, have given you different levels of experience, resiliency, and expertise. And keep pushing for what you believe is right for you. And don't shortchange yourself, because you're worth the work. And if you don't put in the work, it's not going to happen. You can't delay that. It won't happen on its own. Thank you.
I would definitely say, and you know, going off of even what James said, the idea that, you know, you're on social media, you're listening to these podcasts that are telling you like, these are the people who are victims and these are, you know, what they look like, this is who they are. And, you know, to James' point, when you go on to the World Health Organization, the CDC, like any website, to be completely honest, you can clearly see that like most people know someone who's a survivor. Most folks who experience any form of sexual violence or abuse, it is within a relationship. So I'm just very happy that James pointed that out, because there very much still is this narrative like, oh, well, you knew them so, and it's like, actually, you knew them so. Like, that's where we need, I like to say, a lot of our resources and our education and our statistics are showing what it is, but the way that we still go about it to be resources is not reflecting what we know. So if we are aware that, most folks know who their perpetrator is, why don't we treat it that way? And going into how that impacts someone's identity, for me, when you're sitting by yourself and you're alone and you really are just reflecting, like that feeling that you have, that we've all had when we, have come to terms with anything, whether it is grief from the passing of a loved one, grief. I actually like to tell people, they teach us about grief when someone else passes, but no one talks about the grief in yourself. Like when you have to let go of a part of yourself, where I tell people sometimes the hardest things to grieve is people that are still alive, because you're just like, whoa, like you're still walking, you're still on this earth. And I just either don't have a connection with you, or when it's yourself, I don't have a certain connection with myself, right? And I think also understanding that because of a lot of institutional oppressions that we have, there are so many people who don't get to say that they are even a victim. A lot of my work now centers communities that are marginalized. Again, myself being a Black woman, like studies have shown that, young Black girls as young as 5 are thought to have some understanding of like sex. Even when they ask their counterparts or like educators who are like adults, they're like, oh yeah, like a 5-year-old girl knows about sex because she's Black. So when that 5-year-old girl turns into a 25-year-old girl, of course they might not see us as victims, because you don't even think of us as being victimized. We are over sexualized, right? So for someone seeing a group of people in that way, how do we think we internalize that? That means a lot of folks are walking around not thinking that they are even deserving of help. Like I'm pretty sure it is about over 70% of Black women have experienced a form of sexual harassment or touching before they were even 18 years old. And I was like, 70% is a lot. That's too close to 100 for me. Right? So if that's already a vast majority before they're even 18, that's too many. When you talk to a lot of Latina women or Hispanic women, a lot of times there is a complete denial or just complete, know that any form of abuse or assault is happening, which is for a laundry list of reasons, right? So there's so many communities who, even when you approach them with, hey, like this is happening to you, it's like, no, it's not. And I think too often we just kind of let these folks have that mindset instead of really addressing, like I tell people, the systems that allowed them to think they're not deserving of help because it's not their fault. And so I do think that there's a lot of people who internally they know something that happened to them is not right. There's a lot of folks who were victimized, who were abused, who know this happened to me, but everywhere they look, every resource they go to, it's like that just happens to you. I've had too many experiences, even myself, being told like, this is just how people will treat you, and this is just what you have to deal with. And I don't think it's right that as a Black woman, people are telling me that as a Black woman, I should just be accepting of abuse because of what my skin looks like. So I really will also say, especially talking to marginalized communities of color, that it is very hard to see yourself as a survivor because no one even wants you to be a victim. So it's a long road of really having to unpack a lot of institutional oppressions in that way.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Thank you for sharing your perspective. It's really powerful. On the other end of the spectrum, many survivors feel like their trauma has become such a large part of who they are that they have trouble identifying as anything else. What would you say to someone who is struggling in that way?
Well, I first want to know if they're still in a trauma system of some kind. Perhaps a trauma bond is even formed. Perhaps the trauma may include survivor's guilt. They feel that it is not respectful to move on somehow. Perhaps they feel so damaged and marginalized that their true self is not really present, and they must always lead with their wounded parts to feel a sense of validation, not only about what happened, but about who they are. Maybe they're living in an invalidating environment, and I remember, no, yes, they are. Our society is a very invalidating environment for survivors. And again, it can take time, but even small victories are really significant. And nothing succeeds like success. So, as you move forward, if it's so helpful if someone could maybe point out and see you, maybe returning to yourself. I always really encourage people to just keep going, don't give up. I really believe that, all due respect to therapy, we each have what we need to heal. And so if we can just, continue to emphasize that, maybe people can not so much identify themselves just on the basis of the trauma they've experienced.
Like to acknowledge Dr. King like had a whole poem like in half of that answer, like you trauma bonded with yourself. I was like, these are bars. Like this is, I don't know, the way you said that was just so like beautifully poetic. Again, I'm a spoken word artist, and I was like, did you write a poem for like this answer? So I just had to highlight that because I really, and I thought that was really deep. Like you trauma bonded with your own identity. Like I don't know if I grew up in church, so I'm just kind of like, I don't know if we heard that. We might have to say it again, but that was a deep response. So my response to that would really be, coming from a place also of understanding, because that's really a part of my journey as a survivor. I started writing poetry to express, my depression, my suicidal ideations. I was anxious. I was all these different, every feeling you can have. I was all of it at once, right? And I kind of built this brand, as She Will Speak, as being this girl who was going to talk about mental health and talk about, her story. And it was really from this lens of being still in a state of like, I'm struggling, like I am depressed. I really don't know if I'm going to make it. I don't know what life looks like after this. And I feel I almost, actually the way Dr. King said it, it was like I was married to that idea of myself. Like at one point I really looked at it and was like, I can't, like, I'm not her, but I don't know who I am, because it's almost, to me, like you feel like it wasn't bad enough if you can move on from that. Like if I get to move on from this state of depression and sadness and this very early, wound of being traumatized, it's like, was I ever really traumatized? Because I'm not still upset and crying and in this negative space. And like I said, for kind of building this community where, I was working with national organizations, I was working with, schools, and, I met We Are Her. I met so many people because of this. And it almost felt like a betrayal to be like, but I don't just want this to be me. Even identities that we can see on the outside. Like again, I'm seen as someone with brown skin. I'm a Black woman, but that's not all of my identity. That's one piece of a million pieces of myself. And although when I move through the world, that might be someone's big identity of me, I know that when I go to another country or when I meet different people, to them it might just be like, okay, you had on a gray sweatshirt, right? So I think really understanding that even when it comes to your survivorship, that is one part of so many identities. And I would encourage someone, especially the person in the space that is acknowledging, like, I want to go out and do things, and I want to really move past the space that I am, that it is okay. And it is scary, to be like, how do I manage these emotions that come up? How do I say, although this hurts me, I don't want to keep hurting myself, especially, to be very transparent, someone like myself who battled with self-harm and suicidal ideations. Like, it's a very big thought process to be like, I want to grow. I want to figure out what this looks like, right? So that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this question, because I'm just like, wow, like that was like, I remember sitting there like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I want to figure out who is Cheyenne after this. And two pieces of advice I'll give, being able to be blessed with the opportunity to afford and have access to both a therapist and a life coach definitely did help me. So one thing my therapist told me was like, simple question. She was like, do you think that there are kind people in this, world? And I was like, yeah, like, and she's like, why? I was like, well, because I'm a kind person. I truly think, all the actions I take are out of the kindness of my heart. I don't move with malice intent. I truly believe I try to make the world a better place, right? And then her question after that was like, then why don't you think kindness can happen to you? And I was like, oh, that was a lot, Kim. You did a lot in this session, right? But I'm happy that she asked it in that way, because I also had to acknowledge, with sometimes struggling, in the aspect of how do we move throughout the space, I was pushing so many good things away from me because I had to be in this victim mode that I kind of attached so many things to. What does my poetry look like now that I'm happy? what do my films look like now that I'm happy? You know, how do I go out with friends? All these different things. And even working with my life coach, Astrid Ferguson, really understanding that it is okay to grow. You know, and I think that's where I will leave it. And it's not saying that if you're not ready to grow, you know, that's a problem in itself, because like I said, I stayed in that stage for a long time. But it's okay to recognize, like, I need to figure out who else I am. And again, going back to, I think, the question we asked before of, like, you know, people who struggle to identify as a survivor, like I say, you have the feeling in your soul, in your spirit. Everyone has that feeling. You know when you're ready to kind of see what the next chapter is like. So as someone who, again, built a lot of their identity about, you know, again, being depressed, having suicidal ideations, being traumatized, like that's what everything I wrote about, posted was like. And now when you see my stuff, it's like you probably never even know. It's really weird actually telling people that was my journey. I'm very happy though, because now I get to show up like this. Because Cheyenne, even I'm sure when Stevie met me, was very different than this Cheyenne that can give you this advice. So there is beauty in growing, because now I'm on this side of my journey and I can talk to people who, you know, were in the same stage that I was in.
I love that. Thank you. There is often a lot of talk about shifting from a victim mentality to a survivor mentality. Is this an important shift to make? Why or why not?
I would say this is an individual question. And the reason why is because, even going back to my answer, although I'm in this beautiful stage of life that I'm in, like, it's very weird, y'all. I wake up happy and I'm just like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to, you spend a lot of money on those copays. You're going to be happy. You're going to implement it. But really understanding that I move through being a survivor, through being a victim, through being an advocate. Both Dr. King and James also said it, like, healing is not linear. Like, it's not just a straight line. Okay, great, you're at this point, you don't go back. Like, and I think really understanding that maybe switching mentality is not about your identity as far as what you call yourself, but it's more so how can you maybe better manage when these things happen. And again, not holding yourself guilty if one day you do have maybe a panic attack or breakdown. I still have them from time to time, but understanding that I'm not going to shame myself for feeling pain in this journey. So I think that's definitely where that shift of mindset comes in. It's not so much, and here's this brand new title. It's really understanding that all of these things are going to be in this boiling pot. And the question is, how do you manage it that makes you feel, and I think the key word for me is the safest, because it's not about how other people are looking at you. It's how you feel within yourself, your spirit, and how you are able to go along your day.
I loved your answers. They all come from the heart. I swear people design their own therapies. And I think the way that you're designing your life really shows that. You know, you're making sure that you feel safe. And isn't that the definition of a survivor? It's, you know, deciding what situations are best for you, how you want them to go down, how you want things laid out. I'm not really fond of, you know, either the term victim or survivor, because I still feel like it ties our identity so much to the trauma. But I understand that there's some things that kind of defy the language, and that's why I appreciate, you know, how you've, you know, described how you conduct yourself, because that is a pattern of recovery. And I wish that we could say more that, look, I've experienced something and I'm in the process of recovery, but that's not how it works. You know, we need a shorthand way of describing where we're at. So, but I think for now, the language that we have, it's really, really important to identify as someone who's coming from a position of strength and knowledge and experience, and someone who has truly survived a situation where they might not have.
Thank you for your answers. So this next question, we're going to have everybody answer it, because I just think that there's so many perspectives and so many amazing answers we can get from this. What are some ways that survivors can lean into the present moment and spark some joy?
It can be hard to like feel happy about life and things that should normally bring you joy when there's so much bad things that happen. And dealing with the aftermath of trauma. I've found it's easiest for me to like focus on what actually does make me happy and to prioritize those things. I spend my weeks working on sexual assault cases, 40 hours a week. And then when I go home, there's a 22-month-old grandbaby waiting for me. And I just play with her for 2 hours every night when she's there. And that's not just self-care, but I'm loving her and getting kind of renewed and some happiness put in my life from this wonderful little child that's present in my house. That right there is something that sparks joy, and I just focus on it, and I forget about everything that happened during the day. I forget about what I'm doing the next day, and I remind myself those things will be there in the morning. Right now, I've got these little eyes in front of me, and I need to put my heart into that, my attention into that, and make sure that she understands that Pop-Pop is there for her. And you can do that with everything that is important to you. But you have to know what's important to you first. You have to like think about it, put a little effort into deciding what do I really want to keep doing in my life? What do I really want to continue bringing me happiness and joy? And how do I get myself into a mindset where I can commit to actually letting it happen?
Thank you. I love that you talked about love because inevitably there's something that we all love. Can be a person, can be a pet, can be nature, going out on a walk. And love is really transformative. It's like one of the best healers out there.
I want to share some imagery with you that I received a long time ago. And it's imagining yourself sitting on the head of a pin with your legs dangling over the side and asking yourself, what's wrong with this moment? So just really centering yourself just right here, right now, and really asking yourself, and usually there's nothing wrong with this moment. If you're not perseverating about the past or worrying about the future, if you're just right here in this moment, a lot of times you can really experience a lot of beauty in whatever love is around you. I also like to practice returning to the center of my true self rather than pushing thoughts away. It seems like so much more work to push thoughts away. So kind of like you learn to do in yoga or meditation, just coming right back to your center, to who you believe, or at least you want to believe you are. And just noticing those thoughts as they come and go and recognizing I don't have to attach to them right now. And as we have mentioned before, being out in nature, or even just sitting in a busy waiting room, you can just notice what's going on around you without having to attach to it. I think about what each moment has to offer in my own growth and experience as a human being. It takes practice. I mean, when somebody enters a room, I always think, oh, what do they have to teach me? What should I be paying attention to? I really think Eckhart Tolle has been a big influence in the last 10 years for me about listening to that true self, that voice, not the clatter in your mind, but the part of you that notices what's around you and notices the clatter in your mind. And it, like I said, I wish I did it more often. I think I have to stop every once in a while, remind myself, hey, just stay right here in this moment, and don't think so much about what's happened in the past or worry about, how I'm going to handle something in the future. It can just be right here in the moment.
Knowing that you're deserving of healing, and deserving of being in these moments is really important. And the reason why I say that is I think a lot of times, as a survivor, right, you don't know what healing or joy or like kind of sitting in moments looks like anymore. At a certain point, I thought I could erase my trauma by like being perfect at everything. So I was in every club, I won every award, like you couldn't tell me anything. And then one day I remember, this is when I was in college, and my past therapist in college, when I like won an award, and I can't even think of the name, but it was a really big award, on campus for given by the Women's Center. And I just kind of went into the session, was like, oh yeah, I got this award. And my therapist was like, why can't you sit with this? And even up until recently, it'd be like I get something that's like, that's great, I need more, and kind of really understanding, well, where is that coming from? It's because it's like I had to give myself a reason to be like, nothing bad should happen to me again. So if I get all these things, it's almost like I can erase everything that happened and I can create this new, again, going back to the identity question, I could be this new perfect person. But then what I realized is, to her point, like how I'm listening to people talk about me and the work I do, and I'm just not really hearing it. It's just in one ear out the other because I'm focusing on the next thing, spending time with friends and, worrying about should I really be here? Do I deserve to be here? Is this a real scenario, right? And I think one day I just kind of looked up and realized how many things had passed me by, were passing me by, and that I wanted to, be more intentional, which I think both James and Dr. King said, with sitting there. And it is hard, so even creating those moments and going back to one thing I said earlier of like kind of the sabotaging, which I know is something I do, giving yourself the grace and giving other people the grace. One of my friends is a therapist, Dr. Jennifer Santos, and I love the way she said it to me just in a casual conversation. When you say that people won't be there for you, when you say that people won't help you, you're answering the question for them. And that's denying them choice. I was like, dang, why am I friends with so many mental health professionals? Like, very lucky, but like y'all are very smart. But on a serious note, really understanding, like, I am not allowing the world to make a choice to really love me. I'm telling the world, you can't love me. So really, even for anyone who's going to be watching this, really sit with yourself. There are so many people in this world. And I believe what they say when they said, you have not met all the people who are going to really care about you. And are you really going to tell all the people in the world that you can't be loved? I just think there's too many people for that. So that would really be my answer for sitting those moments, having that joy. And like I said, it's not easy. It's very hard. But when you find it, when you have that glimmer and you're able to see a moment fully for itself, it's really beautiful. It's something that, is ingrained in your heart.
Well, what a perfect segue into our next question, which is all about allowing people to show up for us as survivors, and and also about support systems. It's possible that somebody is going to watch this and does not identify as a survivor themselves, but we all know somebody. We all love somebody who is a survivor. So the next and last question is, how can friends and family of survivors help support them in reclaiming their identity? And how can we show up for each other?
This is something I've taken special interest in. I had a support group. It was in a military facility, and it was the spouses of people who've survived trauma. And what we learned from each other is self-care is important for them too. Compassion fatigue can set in, and they must guard against blaming the person. Learning to separate a person's behavior from their true self, I think, is the first step in reminding them of their true self when they see those behaviors present. It could be something simple like just admiring some artwork or the gardening that they did that day, rather than focusing on maybe behavior that is more aberrant and troublesome. I think inviting them to do something that they used to like to do really helps if you're trying to support a trauma survivor. And reminding them that even though they may not feel like doing something, the good feeling will likely come back if they engage in it, which is kind of good old-fashioned cognitive behavioral activation. A little kindness, like accompanying them to a difficult appointment, asking how they might help, just listening. I don't think listening can ever be overestimated. And I think about all the time and money I've spent going to school to try to become a better therapist. It all boils down to kind of the reason I got into being a therapist anyway. And that is, really to listen to people with your whole self and with compassion.
It's the survivor is in charge of their healing path. They're in charge of where things go. They get to make the calls. Friends and family are passengers on that trip. They're not driving. And they need to recognize that, because there's the danger of things being well-meaning but becoming coercive, because it may be what the friend or the family member thinks they should do to heal, when in reality they may be taking power away from that survivor without knowing it. It may be done with love, but it's harmful, and they really need to check that impulse and step back and be supportive of what the person wants and how they want to do it versus what they think the person should do. And that's good. That's hard to do because you're looking at somebody who's struggling and you just want them to be better. You want them to be the person they were before, and that is not how any of this works.
That just really circles back to listening again and just allowing the survivor to, like you said, be the driver, make their decisions, and just listen with an open heart.
Yes, and I really love what James said about like being a passenger, because I think that's so true. So often, even if even if we don't have the malice at 10, it's like, I know what's best for you because I care, and it's like, actually you don't, because like you're not in this person's being, right? And I would say definitely understanding that, how I use the analogy of like, you're moving into a new house and you're taking everything out of the boxes, and there's definitely a phase where that's happening, but a lot of times what could also be happening is like we're not even reorganizing a house, like we are like remodeling, like we are like ripping down one wall, putting up another. So I think both James and Dr. King's point, like you might not even be the same person anymore. And I feel a lot of folks might not understand why. And kind of going back to one thing I said about our institutional oppressions, the way that we are taught, we have a very patriarchal society, the way that we believe and have certain things. I would also say understanding, that helping with certain boundaries and communication is important, because I also think as a person, maybe who is a friend or family member, it could be a lot. So even understanding, do you have the space to listen right now? Or even understanding maybe as a person, what are you looking for? There are some days I don't want advice. I just want to walk and pace around the room, cursing and being mad at the world, and you could just let me be mad at the world. Don't try to be, well, Cheyenne, no, I don't want to remember anything. I want to be unhealthy in this moment, and then maybe like tonight I'll be healthy. But that's a very real. Sometimes you just want to be angry, right? So understanding, hey, I need advice. Understanding, hey, I just need to vent. Understanding, honestly, I just need a hug. And I need to watch like my movie, personally, my movie to go to is like To All the Boys Loved Before on Netflix, because it's just very cute, very beautiful. And it's like, that's actually a really good tactic I've heard a lot of people use, is like listening to songs or watching movies that how it ends, So that's how I decompress. And I think if you're supporting someone, all those things are definitely healthy, because you need boundaries, even when you're helping somebody. So it's really a journey for everyone in their own way. But I definitely think highlighting even what James said, like you're not jumping to the driver's seat. And I think highlighting, right, what Dr. King said, the ability to kind of like, this is a full out, experience. And for me, definitely being able to understand that we are potentially remodeling a house. We're going to be bringing up a lot of past things that attributed to even why this person is thinking or feeling this way, and creating boundaries, even in the friendship and family that's helping, because it can be helpful to you, because we don't want anyone to get burnt out in this. And it's okay to be like, I don't have the emotional bandwidth to be here. It's totally okay. It doesn't make you a bad friend, because, if you're showing up at like 20%, that's when you can't even be helpful to yourself, right? So I also want to encourage the family and friends potentially watching, like, it's okay that you might need to step back, and it's okay if you're not an expert. That's why, We Are Hers putting on panels like this. Like, there are a lot of organizations giving resources, and it's okay to be like, how can I maybe direct this to someone who has a degree, or who, like, this is what they do and they're trained, because you're not trained. Like, I'm not trained in the capacity of, other James and Dr. King. So a lot of my help is just my experiences and, my work in that way. So when I identify someone needs more help, I shift them to people who can give them more help.
These resources, like these panels, are also super helpful for support systems and support people. Like, if they're just saying like, look, I don't understand, I don't know, how to help, how to support. These are also great resources too. And actually, my friend and I we call it, do you have the bandwidth for this right now? And we'll call each other and ask and say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. And she's also been known to ask me, do you want advice, or do you just want me to listen to you? So that's actually really helpful, because sometimes I'm like, just listen to me. I know I'm being, I'm raging, I'm venting. that's all I need. I want to just thank our panelists today. Thank you for agreeing to be here with us today. I loved hearing everybody's answers. I think this was really profound. We're going to open it up for a second for some Q&A. So if there's any audience members that have a question, just generally or specifically for one of the panelists, you can go ahead and ask those questions now. While we're waiting for any questions to come in, is there anything else that any of you want to add?
I just think it's great that there are a lot more resources now like this with recorded panels that allow people in their own time to find them when they need them.
I agree. I think this is such a powerful thing. So we do have a question.
The question is, I feel like sometimes I don't have the bandwidth for myself. How can we deal with ourselves when we are being too hard? Any personal tips that have helped you? It's like, yes, child, because I am hard on myself. Anyone in my life knows that. So one, I definitely would say something that's very helpful for me is having a support system. I have friends who literally are like, yay, that's great that you're doing this, but did you eat today? I would say when it comes to yourself, like, how do I check myself when I'm being hard? Sometimes it's just recentering and sitting with myself and acknowledging, like, whatever you're doing great. I literally sometimes look at this world like, listen, this is we are in very rough times, like just rough. I feel like every day I open the window, I'm like, why is all this happening? And sometimes it's even simply saying, for where this world is, for where I am doing okay. And I think this is where journaling is also very helpful. Because for me as a poet, I think I didn't realize how it was happening, but it's almost like taking a photograph. You're in a moment, you're kind of stopping time. So when I look back at poems written 2 years ago, I can see the way I thought 2 years ago. And then when I look at how I think today, it's like, wow, I really had grown. Because I think that's also probably why we're hard on ourselves, because we don't think we've grown. And I always like to tell people, growth is not always material things. It's not always buying a new car. It's not having a new job. Sometimes growth is just the things that used to upset you don't upset you anymore. Like things that people have done to you, you could just be like, okay, because I know my worth and I know my value, and I understand that even if something makes me upset, that's okay. Like for me personally, something that I've really struggled with was dating for those reasons, especially being a survivor. Like it's almost like if something didn't work out, it was like catastrophic. All my friends knew, all hands on deck if something did not work out. Now I can say with confidence, like, I have value. I am a worthy person of love. And if you can't give me that, I am okay with not only you moving on, but most importantly was me moving on from people. Because I really struggled to leave relationships that I think either Dr. King or James said that were just very toxic, because I was used to that. So I just stayed. So I definitely would say just remembering, sitting with those moments, centering yourself. And if it's very helpful, I think journaling. Because I think when you get to see how you used to talk about yourself versus how you're talking now, I do think that does something to you. Again, I don't got the degree on the panel, but I'm sure Dr. King would be like, yes, there's something in your mind when you see how you were before and you're like, wow, I've grown a lot. So I think I'm a very visual person with that.
The first thing that jumped out at me is, if I don't have bandwidth for myself, does that mean I would think she's probably filling her time full of stuff so she doesn't have time to slow down and really think about the pain or what she needs. You see that sometimes with trauma survivors, they're like pushing ahead and trying to fill up all their time. And then, sometimes people just crash, and then, you've got a wreck there, and you need to come in and stop everything. So I think if you, Cheyenne, I love how you've shared your personal story so eloquently. But to wake up every morning and think to yourself, okay, what do I need today? Do I need to not go to work? Do I need to step outside first for a while, get some fresh air? Do I need to reach out to that one friend who will either listen or advise? Is there a few people that I know that I could reach out to that almost always are going to help me? And is there some that I know that I shouldn't reach out to when I'm in a situation? Because there are some, they're so well-meaning, like you were saying earlier, James, but no, they're not the ones that you need. But not having bandwidth for yourself concerns me. That's you deserve that, above all other things. You're the only one that can really give that to yourself. No one can give you bandwidth. You have to take it.
I'm not sure if James wanted to answer, but I think I really liked what Dr. King said about putting a lot of stuff on in your timeline to do. I think going back to writing as a suggestion, that's why I actually have a planner, because I think sometimes I didn't think I did a lot of stuff until I saw it written down. And it'd be like, can you do this? Yes. Because for every yes I else, that means I get to give myself a no to actually do work on myself. And then I wake up and be like, why am I so drained? So being in a place now where I intentionally want to spend time with myself, I'm able to look at my planner and be like, I have this meeting or I have to do this thing and I'm going to be, tired from this. So the answer is no. And I also think what I pulled from what Dr. King is saying, even doing a body scan, like sometimes I literally just sit there and I go, and I really just feel how I'm feeling in a moment. And being able to have the confidence, even if it's at work, like it's like, I don't feel well, I'm gonna just take some time, like I'm gonna just take an hour, I'm just gonna come off. Or I know I agreed to hang out with people, but I think I'm gonna spend this time a little bit to myself. So I also think being able to see all that you're doing helps if you're trying to intentionally take time. And I definitely think a body scan, because having moments where you could just really, like, your shoulders are tense, you're not breathing, you're hungry, like I'm sure you don't have the bandwidth for yourself, like, it's lunchtime and we didn't eat. This is why you can't this is maybe why sitting with yourself is not working, because your body literally is focused on other things.
One thing I recommend is just focusing on what's most important to you and what are the things that you could lose and not miss. Make a list. Try that for a little bit and see what that does about increasing your energy and your time. By focusing more on what you enjoy and what you love versus doing things that you've just been doing for a while and think you need to keep doing them and you don't really know why anymore that you're still doing them. And we all have some things like that in our life. For instance, I was doing a podcast with a friend and I was not enjoying it anymore. I was just doing it to support him. And after a while, I was like, dude, you got to find a replacement. I can't do this anymore. And that was the best decision I made for a long time.
Really good advice. We have one more question. We heard a lot about how we should explore what being safe or happy in our bodies feels like. How does someone actually do that?
First of all, I think the forgiving of yourself, not other people. We're talking about yourself. Because I think a lot of times, going back to that shame and that resentment that sometimes we even hold to ourselves, I can be very transparent. There have been multiple times where I've thought about, what I've gone through, and it's like, how could you be stupid? And that's literally the language I use, even when it comes to maybe having new relationships and it doesn't work out. It'll be, well, how can I be stupid to think like somebody actually will love and care about me when this is what happened to me, right? And the idea is I'm not even safe within myself. Like I don't trust myself to make good decisions. And, even though we've answered a lot of questions of having support, and trust me, if it was not for my support systems, I actually tell people straight up when they enter my life, I'm like, I got to bring you to the review board. They're like, who? I'm like, how orgs got board of directors? I'm like, I got that too. As wonderful as all those people are, if I don't trust myself, it doesn't matter anybody that's in my life. And there needs to be a moment where you really sit with yourself. And this is sometimes where this journey gets very hard, but you really have to have those hard conversations. Like you really have to be like, why do we keep doing this? Like this thing of like not trusting, even decisions you want to make. I'm with somebody who, if I wanted to do anything from what next hairstyle, I had to consult like 10 people. And I'm happy one of my friends said, are you looking for, just an affirmation? Or are you looking for advice? Like there's a difference between going to people and just being like, hey, like, what do you think? And you're actually waiting for almost someone to sign you a permission slip. And when you start making little decisions for yourself, like, what, instead I work from home, for example, or I work on like film sets. So instead of maybe working from home a day, I'm going to take myself out to a cafe. I'm going to take myself out for lunch. I'm going to start doing different things without even consulting other people. And after a while, you're going to bring trust in yourself. I'm going to walk away from this person, even to what James said. I actually saw something on social media about that. Sometimes people don't realize it's not even about saying the yes and doing things. Sometimes it's knowing when to be like, no. Like personally, I pray for discernment. Like if there's anything that's important to me, it's being able to discern the good things happening and the things I have to kind of walk away from. So I would say to feel safe in your body, sitting with yourself, spending time with yourself, and making the small decisions. again, even if it's taking yourself out to a new cafe and trying something new, it might not seem like it's going to help you, but it's like building a relationship with someone outside. You don't just like meet someone to be like, let's date now. Like, it's going to be little interactions here and there, little pieces of picking up to be like, you know what? I like you as a person. I feel safe with you as a person. And we do that to ourselves. And like I said, when you're someone who has had a lot of trauma, it feels like you can't trust yourself. So I think that's the most important thing.
I guess I'd like to jump in here too, because I was thinking, just from a purely physiological standpoint, if you've survived something horrendous like a sexual assault, um, why not make a deal with yourself to stay involved in, in a community where there's plenty of research and discourse about trauma. And what that will teach you is, more about the internal and the external cues, so that you can start reading them and noticing the triggers. Sometimes I think, all of us have talked about the subtlety, the nuances of trauma. You don't even realize what triggers are sometimes, but yet you'll be feeling a sense of panic, or you'll get a headache, or all of a sudden this old tension comes and settles in around some part of your body, and you're thinking, uh-oh, I'm kind of in a little bit of trouble here. And then learning about the first things that you can do to kind of take control back and ultimately feel safe in your body. So I know that's not a quick response. Engaging in some of these somatic therapies, the mind-body connection of things like yoga and meditation, or EMDR, which is really teaches you to kind of stay with the feeling and until you can kind of isolate it and dissipate it. So not running ahead too much, not filling up your planner, throwing out the things that you don't miss. That's such great advice for all of us. And really, really exploring your body and understanding, that PTSD is really a physiological condition above all. Sometimes I think, because it's in the diagnostic manual that, it's not about the body, but it really almost 100% is about the body. So feeling safe in your body is really about understanding it, staying with the therapies, advancing forward into more mastery, developing language, talking to other survivors, talking to as many therapists and experts as you can, and try to get their take on it. I think there's much more to be understood. I think we're still just kind of scratching the surface about, the impact of trauma. And then there's generational trauma. Don't assume that you're 100% healed. Let yourself keep healing. It's such a joy to do that, and you'll find more freedom.
That takes a lot of practice. Just kind of getting in touch with your feelings and being honest to yourself about what you're going through, and taking small steps, and not trying to erase what happened. There are techniques you can engage that will help lessen the impact of those things over time, but it's not going to be super fast. But honestly, you have to pick one thing at a time and tackle that. It may be something like, not being able to walk past a certain house because the paint color on the outside of that house kind of reminds you of the event. Maybe at that point you need to do something to kind of desensitize that color. And then, that's one less trigger you're dealing with on an ongoing basis. Don't try to overdo it, because you'll get overwhelmed and then you quit. Nobody can handle all of that all at once. It's a process that takes many years. I went through therapy in 2008, initially to deal with my own stuff from several years before, when I finally felt I was comfortable enough to call it what it was. And then 10 years later, I had to unpack some additional stuff that I hadn't looked at yet. And suddenly I was like, oh, yeah, that stuff was there too. It was all dusty. I couldn't see it. And I dusted it off and started working on it. And I felt better about those memories and knowing they were there because they didn't affect me the same way, because I acknowledged their presence. So part of it's just going to be acknowledging the presence of what's there when you see it. And you're not going to see it all at once. I'm just honest. You're not going to see it all at once. Just accept that you're going to miss some things and they're going to pop up and suddenly they're going to be there and you're going to like, wow, why am I really feeling this now? It was just a time for you to feel it and try to work on it. And it is work. It's not wishful thinking, it's work. You can do it.
All right, thank you. That seems to be the end of our questions. So I think that is a wrap. I just thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to those who attended. And I think this was just wonderful. I hope it was meaningful for everyone. And thank you to We Are Her for doing such powerful work and bringing this kind of wisdom to people when they might not be able to get it another way. So we will see you later.